Okay, so Stephen King's It is now out, and a lot of us have had a chance to see this. Now, the question from the beginning was always, is this film going to be as good as the Tim Curry version? I say the Tim Curry version, he played Pennywise the Clown in the original, and a very well-beloved horror movie from 1990. This film doesn't shy away from its existence. I mean, particularly if you look at this scene here in the lower left, you can see there's a mannequin clown, and it's kind of modelled on the Tim Curry version, so little things like that, and a few other scenes as well are done very similarly, shot in a very similar way to that original film. Granted, both are based on a book, so you can say ultimately it's just doing what the book did. Well, this is a remake of a film. This is a film. This is not a book based on a book. This is a film, so you're going to compare it to the previous film. Now, one thing that I did like about this film was that the clown was handled very differently as well, in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously it's a clown, so there's some fundamental similarities, but just the way that it kind of moves and talks, that kind of thing. Yeah, there's criticisms it could have been dealt with slightly differently, but I think so far from what I've heard of other reviews, it's been received quite well, and I personally found it quite effective as well. I mean, there are a few scenes in this thing where it's filmed in such a way the clown actually looks to be like huge, like a lot bigger than the children, which is quite an intimidating kind of way of showing this thing. They didn't do anything like that in the original. Now, going back to the original question, comparison in terms of overall, is it as good? It's kind of unfair to say because this is only the first half of that story, so I suppose we could compare it to the first half of that film. I would say it's better than the original in that it just has chance to be. It's bigger budget, for example, and it just fleshes the characters out more. Maybe there's more screen time, I suppose, that kind of thing. Some of the characters, it felt like the children... some of them got left behind a little bit. I mean, I would have said that about the original one, that characters like Stan were kind of left behind a little bit. They didn't flesh that character out too much as a child. This one was fairly similar. Also, the character of Mike Hanlon, which was the black kid, it felt like he could have been in it a little bit more. I know he joins the Losers Club a little bit later on in the story, in this and in the original, but at the same time he carried the thing a little bit more in terms of he figured out what Pennywise the Clown was. That wasn't the case in this, and obviously in the original one he is ultimately the one that kind of brings everybody together later on. So again, some of the children in this, some were given a bit more screen time than others, which was a bit of a shame in some ways. I don't know, it might not have worked if we'd have done it the other way. Just kind of speculating there. But speaking of them coming back together as adults, this one is different in that first film, effectively, the first half of the story is done from the point of view of them as adults remembering things that happen as children. This doesn't really even promise that the clown is going to come back. It strongly suggests that, but there's no kind of narrative in terms of, this is a story that a load of adults are looking back on in years' time kind of thing, or in the modern day, as it would be in this case. This one is just literally straight up, it's a film about some kids in the year 1989, shit happens, they're pretty sure that they've killed it, but they're not 100%, and that's it. So it's fairly self-contained, which is great, because if you look at this film on its own, it is a complete movie. Start, middle, and finish. It is what a film should be. Granted, it's not necessarily what a film should be when it's only the first half of a written story, but this is a film, and many times in the past we've seen things like Hunger Games, for example. All four of those films, barring possibly the first film, have this thing where the film suddenly ends abruptly, and you feel that, and you feel kind of sold short as well, because it's right to see what happens next, come back next year. This film doesn't do that at all. Like I say, there is some suggestion that it's going to come back, but it's only really hinted at, so you don't feel like I say, sold short in terms of, right, you've only bought half a cinema ticket here. So I think it's more enjoyable from that point of view, and from what I understand they are doing a sequel, which is great, and the fact that I'm really looking forward to seeing that, hoping that it's good, it's kind of an endorsement of this film, really, because I do love that original film. I've seen it many, many times, and so have a lot of other people. So for me to endorse this and say, as somebody who doesn't really like modern horror films, I think they did this one quite well. I'd say that's as best endorsement as I could give it. I'm not saying it's amazing. In some ways, films like The Conjuring, which I did like, the 1 and 2 I thought were very good. I would say it's kind of on a par with that, but this one benefits from having the sort of Stephen King, the fact that it's rooted in Stephen King mythology kind of gives this the edge on top of that. The other thing I would say about this, if you're going to compare it to something like The Conjuring, this feels more like it's a kind of real world thing with something paranormal in it. Things like The Conjuring just feel like a paranormal world, if that makes sense. And I kind of prefer horror films like this because it's got the kind of X-Files, not mythology, but the X-Files tradition of being set in the real world, because Chris Carter, who created the X-Files, always said it's only as scary as it is believable, and particularly like the first series of that show felt that way, and you kind of feel that way with this. The characters are quite believable. There's things that they do with the characters in this that just feel very straightforward, even though they're going through what they're going through. You kind of look and think, that is how children of that age would act. Not even to the paranormal stuff, but just to like the circumstances, like bullies and being attracted to girls and things like that. It's very kind of realistic in that sense, which is really good, because although it doesn't necessarily have to, not everything in a horror film has to be horror, sometimes you have to set up realism before you can introduce the horror for that reason. And this film succeeds, I would say it does. Like I said, there are better horror films out there than this, but definitely worth watching. And like I say, if you do like the original, I'm pretty sure you'll like this as well, and in some ways you might even prefer it. So I'll leave it there. There's plenty more I could say. I didn't want to spoil this thing too much. There were a few little things I could sort of say about it. Speaking of the X-Files before, look out for... there's a character in this played by the guy that used to play Mr. X in the X-Files. You'll spot him fairly near the beginning of the film. Not much else I can say in terms of like Easter eggs or anything like that, or any cameos or anything else that you might have been expecting possibly, but do keep your eye out, because occasionally there's the odd little thing like that you'll spot. So for now, I'll just leave it there and say I recommend this film, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.